The Pyotr Bagration is a premium Tier 7 Russian cruiser and the reward ship for the ongoing September 2021 campaign. Hello, I am Xarkun and this is World of Warships Legends. Today we're going to talk about the Little Peter, and I say it's the Little Peter because everyone knows the Big Peter is the Tier 4 Russian battleship, but as usual, we will skim over my mod selection, glance at my commander build, examine the armor viewer, and then jump into some gameplay, over which we'll talk about the ship's stats and how I think it's best played. I'll say that the Bagration is, in my opinion, a fairly solid and unique Russian cruiser, and it's a campaign ship I wouldn't mind buying the Admiralty backing for. Anyway, mod selection, aiming systems mod 1 in the first slot, steering gears in the second, concealment in the third, main battery reload in the fourth. The commander I've chosen is Nikolai Kuznetsov with Mikawa and Yamamoto as inspirations. Note, I am not running Equilibrium of Power. More on that after this brief look at the armor viewer. You'll note the 25mm plating everywhere on the ship, coated in green. This is, of course, overmatchable by 15 and 16-inch guns, but it does have a 40mm icebreaker for what it's worth. The deck is also 27mm, meaning it is technically capable of bouncing 15-inch armor-piercing shells off the deck if they come in at a sufficient angle. And the Citadel is, well, it juts above the waterline, fairly exposed. I think it's got some layered protection to it. Basically, this ship is heavily armored versus cruisers, but not really versus battleships. The game I have for you is on Tears of the Desert, Domination Mode game, and we will jump in immediately to talking about the stats. The first and most obvious stat is the health points pool, 42,000 hit points. I think maybe a little bit higher than average in terms of Tier 7 cruisers, but probably right in there with the average. It has 9 180mm guns, though, in 3 triple turrets, which I think technically makes it a heavy cruiser. I think the light cruisers have to have smaller guns. These 9 180mm guns range out to 16 kilometers at base. I have them up to 18.3 kilometers with the Kuznetsov build. They have a base reload time of, I think, 11 seconds. I didn't actually write it down, but I've got that reload time down to 9.7 seconds with the main battery reload mod. And that is, I suppose, a fairly quick reload time in terms of heavy cruiser reload time, but these guns are also smaller than your typical heavy cruiser guns. The turrets traverse 180 degrees in 25.9 seconds with the main battery reload mod, which decreases the speed at which the turrets traverse. HE Alpha is 2500 with a 13% fire chance, which I think is slightly underwhelming for a heavy cruiser, although it may be right on par with some of the others. But the armor-piercing Alpha Strike, 4,550. With Kuznetsov's skill Punch Through active, I've got that up to 4,914. And I think the AP on this ship is quite excellent and probably the way to go. In fact, I think anytime you can shoot AP in this ship, you probably want to be doing that. But if you don't want to shoot AP or HE, it does have torpedoes. 10 torpedoes in 2 quintuple launchers, one on either side of the ship. These torpedoes have a range of 8 kilometers. They travel through the water at a rather pedestrian 55 knots. 14,400 maximum damage, or alpha strike, and a very long reload time of 131 seconds. Nevertheless, they can occasionally be quite useful. The Aaa Defense Rating of this ship is 85 overall. It does have some nice 5-kilometer range anti-aircraft guns, 100mm in size, that do 156 average damage per second, so it's probably no slouch in the anti-aircraft department, but frankly I really don't see carriers around that much, so I haven't been able to get a good feel for it. This Atlanta, though, I think he's going to get a good feel for the armor piercing. Let's see. And the results are no. Apparently that shot was not good. I feel like I get a nasty hit on him somewhere in here, though. Maybe this one is the hit I'm thinking of. No, still no. 3 over penetrations, though. You gotta love it against these lightly armored broadside cruisers. In any case, what else do we have to talk about in terms of stats? 34.5 knot top speed, which is, you know, fairly common amongst the tier. It's not particularly fast by cruiser standards at tier 7. It's not particularly slow either. The turning circle is 890 meters, you know, pushing 900 meters, kind of wide. And the rudder shift isn't super responsive, 8.4 seconds with the rudder shift mod, which is usable, but this is certainly not an agile cruiser. Concealment, like the concealment on all Russian cruisers, is pretty poor. 12-kilometer base detectability range by sea. I have a rank 16 Mikawa as an inspiration on this commander build, so I've got the concealment down to 11.4 kilometers by sea. Now, what do I think of this ship? Well, technically it's a heavy cruiser, and the AP hits like heavy cruiser AP. These guns are 180 millimeters in size, as I've said, and at base they have that 4,550 AP Alpha Strike. That, I think, is pretty comparable to the Baltimore, which has 203 millimeter guns, and its AP Alpha Strike is, I think, an even 5,000 right now. So this is a very good Alpha Strike for these AP shells, and you do want to be using these AP shells. Now, since the guns are 180 millimeters, they are a little bit bigger than light cruiser guns, which means the high explosive gets more penetration. Now, if you're running a standard cruiser without any special rules to its high explosive penetration, and that cruiser has 152 millimeter guns, then without the equilibrium of power skill, it can only pen, I think, 25 millimeters of armor. And then, of course, you put EOP on those 152 millimeter guns, and suddenly they start penning 32 millimeters of armor. 32 millimeters of armor is a pretty common value at tier 7. Basically, all of the battleships have it across their bows. Many of them have it across their decks. Some of them are entirely coated in 32 millimeters of armor, which is why EOP is such a useful skill on light cruisers. It means you get a lot more penetrating high explosive hits on battleships. Now, I have not put it on the Pyotr Bagration because it does have 180 millimeter guns, and those can penetrate 30 millimeters of armor with their high explosive shells. And that's typically good enough to pen battleship superstructure, but it's not going to be getting quite as many penetrations on all parts of the battleship as something running EOP would. And you absolutely could put EOP on this ship in order to penetrate 32 millimeters of armor, and in fact your penetration would be greater than 32 millimeters of armor. However, I don't think having penetration greater than 32 is going to be doing you many differences, because anything that doesn't have 32 millimeters of armor on plating on it somewhere is going to have a lot thicker plating, like the Grosse Kurfürst or the Vladivostok, both of which, for example, have in excess of 50 millimeter plating on their decks. So the extra penetration over 32 millimeters that EOP is going to give you is nothing special. That being said, I almost think EOP might be the better way to go with this ship so that it can have that better penetration and be able to punch through 32 millimeters of armor with the HE. Of course, on the other hand, that cuts down on the fire chance, and you may want to rely on that fire chance to do damage against angled targets. But unangled targets or slightly angled targets, particularly cruisers like that Suzuya, fire AP at them. Fire AP into the broadsides of battleships, into the broadsides of cruisers especially, and you will probably be impressed with the performance of this AP. Now, I don't know whether it gets improved penetration angles. Maybe it does, judging by how easily we were able to penetrate that Suzuya, who was slightly angled, and that Ochakov, who is now dead. Now, I don't know exactly what 180mm guns overmatch with their AP. In order to figure that out, you would take 180 divided by the magic number 14.3. That would give you the armor value that these AP shells can overmatch. And I don't know if this is a case of overmatching these cruisers out here, or this is a case of improved penetration angles on the AP. Either way, ridiculously effective against cruisers, probably the most effective AP out of all of the Russian cruisers that are currently in the game, except for, of course, the Stalingrad, whose AP is on an entirely different level. Also, this ship is pretty good at brawling with other enemy cruisers, given its 25mm of armor everywhere. That, when angled, is enough to pretty much bounce all cruiser caliber AP at this tier, exempting things like the Siegfried, which has 15-inch guns, but you should be able to comfortably angle against everything else, and because you have 5 torpedoes with fairly decent alpha strike, you're probably pretty good at brawling with cruisers that don't have torpedoes, and also, the 25mm of armor that this ship is coated in is enough to bounce shells or angle against certain battleships that you may face. For example, the Scharnhorst is not going to be penetrating angled 25mm armor with its 283mm guns. Neither, I think, is the Ochakov with its 305mm guns or the King George. And all 3 of those battleships you can face. If you are facing those battleships, then you can, of course, play a little bit more aggressively, angling your armor. You could even potentially push up into the battleships. In fact, on my stream Friday night, entitled Salt Wars Short, Fun Size on Friday or something like that, I did take this ship out for one game. I fought a Scharnhorst. I was able to close the distance with him, brawl with him, and eventually finish him off using a combination of my torpedoes and guns. The Bagration also has Sonar, which of course detects torpedoes at ranges. It does not have radar, though, so it's only sonar, and it's only really useful for protecting yourself. It doesn't have any of that kind of crazy long range. I don't think it does anyway, like the Germans have. It's just a self-defense tool, and a tool that provides utility for your team in the form of spotting any torpedoes that may be near you or headed toward any other friendly ships near you. But no radar means, it's not quite as scary as something like the Ochakov or the Chapayev when it comes to countering destroyers. Nevertheless, the large guns with the, fairly meaty 2500 HE Alpha Strike, good against destroyers when you can hit them. However, I think this King George, if he is going to fire the shell type I think he's going to fire at me, he will demonstrate one weakness of this cruiser, which is that it is very vulnerable to any high explosive that can pen 25mm of armor, particularly high explosive shot from British battleships like the King George, the Nelson, or the Vanguard or Conqueror. If those things are firing high explosive at you, they're going to pen every single part of this ship and do a wicked amount of damage. But this King George is in fact firing armor piercing at us. As I said, we can angle against that armor piercing, and we can comfortably push in and brawl with this King George very easily. Switching to the armor piercing, I think we had HE loaded now. He's giving us flat broadside. So we'll see what these guns are capable of against the upper belt armor of a Tier 6 battleship. And you can see that the results, while not anything spectacular like, say, the results that the Baltimore might be getting, well, they're still solid. About 4K every salvo. And that is whittling this guy down. There's really not anything he can do to me with his armor piercing at this kind of angle while I'm bow tanking him. If he switched to HE, he really could ruin me there. But looks like we're going to actually finish him off with our guns before our torpedoes even get there. 55 knots on the torpedoes, by the way, is pretty slow. It's the same speed as the American Tier 7 destroyer torpedoes, or Tier 6 destroyer torpedoes on the Fletcher and Benson. They aren't the fastest torpedoes, but they do have a nice long range, and in situations against other cruisers with torpedoes and any battleships that can't actually overmatch your armor, like that King George back there, well, this cruiser can be extremely difficult to deal with. In any case, this game is winding down. I do think this is a solid ship, and in fact, I think I like playing it more than I like playing the Ochakov or the Chapayev or any of those. I feel like it's got a little bit more versatility to it, given its armor scheme. There are things it can do that those ships just really can't do. At the same time, it's really not the HE spamming menace that those ships are, and you're only going to have the most success if you're actively switching between shell types based on the targets you're shooting at. Angled battleships, of course, you want to be shooting the HE. Probably the same thing with angled cruisers, but you get broadsides on any of those ships and you start shooting the AP, then you will be rewarded, which, it's unlike any of the Russian cruisers that have previously been added into this game as Tier 7 premiums. It's not like the Ochakov or Kutuzov at all. I think it's a fairly solid ship. As I said in the beginning, I wouldn't mind paying the Admiralty backing for it, and in fact, I will do so, and I'll grind out this campaign and make the Little Peter a permanent part of my fleet. Hopefully, this video helped you decide whether you want to do the same thing or not. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing before you go, and as always, thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye.